Okay, one of the biggest things that you need to understand in leadership and management, although it may not be very interesting right now, is that you understand that how an organization is structured really determines how it functions, and then also really determines the culture that you see within the organization. And all organizations are structured a little bit differently. Some run along the same lines, but there are some factors that make a difference in how an organization is structured and then how it runs. For example, normal acute care facilities, or hospitals like we call them, run on certain guidelines in certain ways. But then you have your magnet hospitals that work a little bit differently. Their governing style is a little bit different, and you'll learn, and you need to understand as you branch out and you start your career how these differences play a role in how the whole organization functions. Now, every organization has a formal structure and an informal structure. Of course, formal, you're looking at the hierarchy of the whole organizational structure. Who's at the top? Who's in the middle? Who's at the bottom? Who has formal power? And this is important because this tells you who is in charge, who is in authority. What authority do you have? What is your responsibility and accountability as an entry-level RN? And then as you move up to a charge nurse position, your responsibility and authority changes. As you move up to nurse manager or chief nursing officer, your formal power is different, so your responsibility is different. Therefore, your accountability is different. Now, informally, everybody has their own informal structure as well. You talk about the grapevine, how things travel down the grapevine. Nothing, maybe a big announcement hasn't been made formally, but people are talking by the water cooler or whatever, in the med room, about little things that might be happening behind the scenes. Informally, the focus structurally should be on the employees, and then the relationships. As a nurse manager, a good nurse manager and a good charge nurse will form relationships with their employees and with their nurses and techs, so that you build this trust, and again, things run a little bit more smoothly when you do have those bonds and those relationships. Now, here it's important to realize that every organization has a mission statement, a vision, and then a philosophy. And a lot of times that mission determines how the organization will be structured and how it will be set up. A mission statement is a brief statement that identifies why the organization exists. What is its purpose? Who are they going to serve? How will they serve those employees? What is it that are those patients or those people? What is their goal? What is their main reason for being in existence? For example, the mission of Baptist Health in Montgomery reads as follows: as a witness to the love of God through Jesus Christ, Baptist Health exists as a voluntary, not-for-profit organization to promote and improve physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being of the people and communities it serves through the delivery of quality healthcare services provided within a framework of fiscal responsibility. So it is one sentence long. It is a very long sentence, but usually a mission statement is brief. What's your purpose? They want to deliver quality care in a cost-effective way and still remain within those Christian principles that they are based on and have built on. They're going to serve their patients, and they're going to do it in a Christian way, so that they can not only take care of their physical well-being, but their mental well-being and their emotional and spiritual well-being as well. Now, a vision statement is a little bit different. This describes future goals or aims of an organization. Super brief. For example, I've given you one. County Hospital will be the leading center for trauma in the region. Just a very basic, very general. There's a Baptist Health in Arkansas, and their vision is that Baptist Health will improve the health of Arkansans by changing the way healthcare is delivered. So just very general. Mission statements, though, are brief, however, really extend what the purpose is of the organization. Now, philosophy goes into a little bit more detail about their values, what they believe, and we talked about this a lot in senior seminar when we talked about nursing philosophy and what your philosophy was. But I want you to think about real quick as we go on through, what would be your personal mission statement as a nurse? What is it that you want to do? What's your purpose? Who are you going to serve? How are you going to do it? Or in what way are you going to do it? What characteristics are you going to do it with? So just something to think about that. Now, a lot of your organizational designs are set up almost like a bureaucracy. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, because this just basically shows you how the labor is divided up. And there has to be a clear division of labor. Everybody needs to know what their responsibility is. You need to know who you're going to answer to. You need to know who your immediate boss is. You need to have a well-defined hierarchy of authority so that you know who is at the top and how do things get divided up and where do I fall in that hierarchy. There has to be a system for dealing with work situations. It just is what it is. So with that comes rules and regulations, and again, you have to have someone who is basically in charge and running this whole big organizational design. If you go in haphazardly, of course, you're setting yourself up for lots of problems and probably failure. So these are some of the terms that we're going to talk about as we go through, just to give you an idea, so that those of you who do eventually move up into the management realm will have an idea and not be caught off guard when you hear these certain terms and things of that nature. First of all, you have unity of command. And what we talk about with unity of command is the vertical lines between positions on the organizational chart. We're not looking necessarily at horizontal layout, but we're looking more at vertical. For example, is there one particular boss? Or are there two particular bosses? Or who is it that I'm actually going to report to? Basically, am I on day shift expected to report to my charge nurse, who then reports to the assistant unit manager, who then reports to the nurse manager? You want to know that layout. You want to know how many employees your manager is responsible for, and you want to know where you need to go when you have problems. It is very important that you follow the chain of command and that you don't get outside of that chain of command when you have difficulty or when you have questions and you need things answered. You want to follow the chain of command, and if you don't know it, then obviously you can't follow it. So just think about, as a student even, you should know who your chain of command is. We here always, are very adamant that if you have a problem in class, that you go to the immediate teacher first. See if you can get a resolution. If not, then you probably need to go to the assistant BSN coordinator or the BSN coordinator. If you're not happy with that decision, go to the director of the School of Nursing. If you're not happy with that decision, go to the dean for the College of the Health and Human Services, and then move your way on up. You have to follow the chain of command, and it's very important that you do that in all areas. Span of control looks at the horizontal, the horizontal aspect of the hierarchy. How many people are directly reporting to one manager? If too many people are reporting to one manager, then sometimes decision making may be delayed. You may not get answers in the in the as rapidly as you feel like you should. So sometimes that is a little bit of a problem. So, you know, for one manager to have 75 employees is a little bit difficult. This is why we see now that a lot of your nurse managers have assistant nurse managers, especially on your large med-surg floors where you do tend to have a large number of employees at one particular time. Centrality is where you fall on an organization chart. Where are you? And sometimes that determines what degree of communication you will have. For example, your middle managers or your midline managers often have a broader view of what's going on in the organization, because not only are they communicating with your upper administration or your top level administration, they're also communicating a lot with the lower level or the entry level, those actual people who are doing the work. So you see, you know, where you fall, and you want to know where you fall as a new nurse. You know, are you on the bottom of the totem pole? Is that going to make a difference? Do the people on the bottom of the totem pole get a voice in any way, shape, or form? You want to know that. This slide just shows you some of the differences here and where you will see differences in top level, middle level, and entry level or first level, and then entry level people. At the top, of course, you've got your CEO, your administrators, chief nursing officers, board of directors. In the mid-level, that's where you've got your nurse managers. Then first level would be your charge nurses or your case managers, and then moving on down the chain. You can see where those mid-level managers, where they fit in the center of the whole organization, why they might know a little bit more about what's going on both sides, because not only are they talking to, communicating a lot with your top level administration, but also the charge nurses, and then you as staff nurses are reporting to them as well. Advantages of an organization chart: again, you know who's making decisions. You know where you are in the hierarchy, in the organization. And it also tells you who you need to talk to. It shows you where you fit in. And again, it shows you your chain of command. So if there are problems or there are questions, you know exactly who you need to go to when you need to talk to someone. Disadvantages of an organization chart: again, as we talked about in the first slide, every organization has their informal structure too, and of course you don't see this on the organizational chart. It also doesn't indicate the degree of authority that each position holds. In different hospitals, or within different hospitals, different positions hold different levels of authority. For example, in one facility where a unit may have an assistant unit manager and a nurse manager, the assistant may have a different degree of authority in one place than they do in another. Maybe in one facility the assistant only does scheduling, but in another organization the assistant not only does scheduling, she has a part in evaluations as well. So it really depends on where you are, but this is not indicated on your organization chart. It's just simply labeled. Now, there are several different types of organizational structures. I'm just going to give you a few examples and just so you'll have an idea. Normally, in a lot of your hospitals, you see what we call a flat or a line organizational design. A lot of times, the flatter your design, usually the more decentralized the decision making is. Meaning, if it's very flat, then a lot of times the people at the level that are doing the work actually have a voice. There's not as many steps and people that you have to go through to get your voice heard. So this tends to be what we see a lot in your hospitals, especially your smaller hospitals. And you can see a picture here. There's not many levels, not a big chain of command here, or a tall chain of command, I guess I should say. You've got your chief nursing officer, then you have your nurse managers, and then you have your staff, and it's very basic. So if you had a problem, you would go to your nurse manager, who would then immediately report to the chief nursing officer. Now, what they don't show here is how this nursing matrix plays a role in the larger organizational structure. So along with this, of course, you would have your chief nursing officer, who would most likely report to the chief executive officer, who then reports to the board of directors, if there is a board, or a national organization if you are a for-profit hospital. Now, an ad hoc design, a lot of your facilities and organizations of any type will add several different, sometimes ad hoc designs or ad hoc structures. These are used temporarily when you've got some type of little project that needs to be completed. It's more like an ad hoc committee. So when you don't want to change your complete organizational structure, but you've got a service line that's maybe going to be there for a very short period of time, then you will add a very simple ad hoc design to the side of your organizational structure. And once that service line is gone, maybe it was a grant or something that was only going to be running for a couple of years. Once that grant money runs out, then there's no more need for the ad hoc structure. So it basically drops off from the organizational chart. There's no need to change the entire organizational chart for something that's only going to be there for a short period of time. So the question is, ad hoc design is incompatible with a formal line structure, true or false? And of course that is false. It can be used temporarily when you have a project that needs to be completed. You see this a lot of times when facilities are going to go through some changes, maybe in building a new emergency room or adding more beds to an emergency room, or maybe they're going to add more beds to an endoscopy suite, and in that case you would add a temporary structure to complete that, and then at the end you would decide, do I need to completely change my organizational structure, or will I fit this in somewhere in my existing structure? Now, matrix organizations are designed to focus on both a product and a function. So with a matrix organization, you not only have a vertical chain of command, but you may have a horizontal chain of command as well. Now, sometimes this can lead to confusion. You see matrix organizations a lot of times in your larger facilities. And what I mean by a product and a function is, for example, in a large facility, you may have a nursing function where you answer to a nursing manager, but you may also have a pediatrics product line. So at that point, if the facility is large enough, then you may have to answer to not only a pediatrics president or manager, but you're also answering to a nursing manager. So not only does somebody have to control and make decisions and run the nursing function, but the pediatric function as a whole. Or, for example, you may have to answer to a nursing function, but a cardiac product line, because a lot of your larger facilities will not only have a nursing function, but then they group all cardiac services together. So anything cardiac answers to one particular executive. So that might include the cardiac cath lab, the telemetry unit, the CCU, the CVICU, and even the chest pain clinic in the emergency room. But you're also going to answer to the nursing as a whole manager as well. So the only problem with that is you have to be careful about, and you have to be sure that you have really good communication, and you have to make sure that all the managers are on the same page and nobody's trying to work against the other one. Service line organizations are very similar to matrix organizations, but basically create a smaller piece of a larger organization. For example, Children's is a service line organization, but then, because they only service children, but then they further break it down into oncology services or hematology services, or there is a trauma service or a burn service or renal services. So in your service line organizations, yes, I'm taking care of pediatrics, but then each service is going to have their own care center within the large facility. Now, when you look at organizational structure, you also want to question, how are decisions made here? This should be something you look at before you even take your job. In organizations with centralized decision making, then your decisions are being made at the top of the hierarchy, mainly by administration, and then they're trickling down. In decentralized decision making organizations, then decision making is spread throughout the organization. So not only would administration be working on making decisions and looking at problems, that they would actually come to you, the staff nurse who is delivering care, who is taking care of the patients, to say, hey, this is our problem. Why do you think this is a problem? Do you have any ideas about how we can fix this? So you definitely want to work in a place with decentralized decision making, where the decisions are made more at the level of care or at the level of the problem. I've always had a problem with organizations who allowed chief executive officers to make decisions about nursing care. Decisions about nursing care should really be made by the nurses and the nurse managers and the charge nurses, and then of course move up to make sure that those decisions are effective, obviously, and approved by administration. But really, those of us who are delivering the care really should be the ones who are involved in making the decisions, and that's very important and something you really want to look at when you're looking for a job. Another thing that goes along with organizations and how they are structured, or that plays a role in how organizations should be structured, are the stakeholders. Who has a stake in this organization? And with that should determine how you structure your care, how you break things apart. Stakeholders can be both internal and external, and every organization should be viewed as being a part of a greater community of stakeholders. For example, think about us as a school of nursing. Who are our stakeholders? Well, think about it. You as a student are a stakeholder. I as faculty am a stakeholder. The hospitals around this area are stakeholders. Home health cares, the citizens in this county and surrounding counties are stakeholders in this program. Not to mention the other faculty in this whole college, in this whole university. We are all stakeholders in this school of nursing. Think about a hospital that you work in. Who are your stakeholders? Well, internally, you as a nurse is a stakeholder. The physicians are stakeholders. And then, of course, you have your patients and your patients' families. All of you are stakeholders in different ways. So again, that should affect the organization's health, the organization's environment, the structure, and how the structure performs and works together. Now, you as a stakeholder in your organization, where you get your first job, or if you're working now, where do you stand in your organization as a stakeholder? Some things and terms you need to be familiar with. Accountability. Accountability is the moral responsibility that accompanies a position. You are going to be holding a position as a registered nurse. You must be able to answer for your decisions and your actions. You have to be able to say and act that you are responsible, and say that you are responsible for your actions. Are you competent enough? Did you complete your tasks? Because you are accountable for those tasks. Responsibility is related to your job assignment. And you have to think about every day you go to work, you're going to get an assignment. It is your responsibility to complete all of those tasks assigned to you that go along with that patient assignment. And then you are accountable for being able to answer for your actions and for your ability to, and willingness and competency to complete your task. Authority is the official power to act and direct the work of others. When you're hired as a registered nurse, you will be given the authority to act as a registered nurse and then to delegate work accordingly. So those are some things that, as a stakeholder and as a nurse, as an employee in your organization, that you need to understand. Organizational culture comes about as a result of the organizational structure sometimes. Your culture is the values and behaviors that contribute to your unique social and psychological environment within the organization. So basically, this is the sum total of your whole organization. If you're going to be at UAB, you are going to adapt to that culture. You're going to see that they have a group of values, they have their own UAB language. There are going to be some sacred areas that will never be able to change because that is the way they've always done things. There are going to be some formal communication networks. There will be informal communication networks. And then each organization will have their own types of rituals. Those at UAB will be completely different from St. Vincent's. St. Vincent's is a Catholic-based Christian organization. Their values, their culture is a little bit different from what you would see at UAB. That's a little bit different than what you would see at Baptist South. It's a little bit different from what you would see at Troy Regional. So organization culture is built over time, and then over time, each facility and each organization has developed its own set of values and behaviors that are unique to them. Now, that is different. The culture of an organization is a little bit different from the organizational climate. Organizational climate is how employees perceive the organization. Now, the perception may be accurate or inaccurate depending on the people. And some people will have different perceptions about the same organization. For example, this School of Nursing. I have one perception about the organization. You as a student, and we've talked about this, have your own perception of how the School of Nursing is. For me, I think we as faculty and as a school try to promote a caring environment so that you're able to learn freely and in your own way. However, you as students may disagree and may say, no, you do not have a caring environment. You put way too much pressure on us and expect us to do things that we shouldn't even be able to do. So organizational climate is different from culture. This is how each individual perceives the organization as a whole. And again, one person's perception will be different. If you work at UAB, you may have one perception of UAB, and your coworker next to you may have a different perception. So that is your organizational climate, which is a little different from the culture. Now, if an organization wants to build a new culture, then a lot of times that requires new leadership. Sometimes people from outside have to come in and take a look, an objective look, and say, hey, if you want to make some changes, I'm just telling you what I see from the outside looking in, I think these are the things that you need to do in order to make some changes. Now, we've talked about structure. We talked a little bit about function and culture. What about management styles? What type of management styles do we have now? In the 1980s, we saw a shift to a new type of management called shared governance. And at this point, I'm talking mainly about nursing and nurse managers. And at this point, with shared governance, what we see is that everybody's playing a role in the decisions. Nurses, even entry-level, brand new nurses, play a role in making decisions throughout the system. Nurse managers years ago were your bureaucratic, in charge. They made the decisions. This is what we're going to do. In shared governance, nurse managers have basically moved out of that traditional role and are now into more a relationship role. You know, they ask questions, they form relationships, they build trust with their workers, and they get input about decision making from the staff nurses because they are the ones that are doing the work. Usually you have to have a structure of rules or bylaws for this type of governance to work. And you see this a lot in your magnet hospitals because shared governance is one of those big things, and one of the biggest criteria for achieving magnet status is so that you have everybody playing a part in the management style and the decision making of the facility. Participatory management is somewhat like democratic management. It lays the foundation for shared governance, but they are not the same. In participatory management or democratic management, others are able to take part in the decision making, but there is still somebody who is in charge, who is in control. And that is different from shared governance. Shared governance is really more of a laissez-faire, I'm laid back, I'm going to really let decisions be made by my staff. Participatory management and democratic leadership, I'm going to let my staff nurses have a say, but then at the end of the day, I've got to make the final decision. Now, if my staff nurses have made a wise decision, then yes, I will go along with that. But at the end of the day, somebody has to be the one that is in control. Last thing, some of you will have the opportunity to work with a magnet hospital, and a magnet hospital is a hospital that is high performing. They're trying to achieve nursing excellence. They can recruit nurses, they retain nurses, they're on the cutting edge of nursing excellence, basically. Only about 7% of all of your hospitals across the country have magnet status. The only hospital in the state of Alabama is UAB. That does not include the Kirkland Clinic yet, but UAB Main Hospital is a magnet facility. Magnet hospitals really push decentralized decision making. They have to. That's one of their requirements. They practice a professional culture in all aspects of nursing care. They work on adequate staffing ratios. They give ample career opportunities for their nurses. You'll see when UAB comes next week, she'll talk about some of the specifics that some of the perks that you get from working from UAB, and one of them is that they will pay for you to go back to school at UAB, which is huge. So they achieve one of their criteria for magnet status by doing that, and they can do that because they are attached to a university, so that's a little bit easier for them. The next two slides, this slide and the following one, talk about the 14 points and the 14 criteria that you must have to reach magnet status. And what you see is that it begins at the top. Your nursing leadership has to be in place, and it has to be high quality. They will look at your organizational structure. They want decentralized decision making, so the flatter the hierarchy, the better. They look at the management style. Is it shared governance? And is it a true shared governance? They look at policies and procedures and the models of care. How is the nursing care delivered? What is the quality of care? Are you constantly working on quality improvement? There have to be constant quality initiatives in place, and they have to have, proof that you are working on this initiative, X, Y, and Z. And they have to see, what are your results? What are you doing? The nurses have to be autonomous, or given some degree of autonomy in their decision making. How do you affect the community? And of course, UAB does this huge. They have a huge effect on not only the Birmingham community, but the whole state as well. Nurses really function as teachers there. They're educating their new nurses, they're educating the patients, they're educating the families, and nursing just has a great image, which is very important. And this is what you see in magnet hospitals. The interdisciplinary relationships are huge. There are interdisciplinary committees, there are interdisciplinary meetings. Everybody works as a team. And I think you can probably see that. Those of you who are precepting at UAB can probably speak to that more than anyone else. You can see how strong the relationships are between doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, techs, respiratory, pharmacy, dietary. Everybody's working together for those patients. And then 14, the last thing is they offer you room for development. Again, UAB pays for you to go back to school as long as you go back to UAB. That's huge. They're constantly offering classes, CEUs, certifications, and things like that. So all of those criteria are important. And actually UAB has been, I think it was in 2015, was certified as magnet status for the 4th consecutive years in a row, which is hard to do. They come back. The ANCC comes back after so many years, and you have to go back up and apply for magnet status again, and they have been reinstated 4 consecutive times. So that's huge for them. Pathway to excellence. There are other facilities who may not have reached magnet status yet, but they're working on excellence, and this is another ANCC opportunity that hospitals can work toward. This recognizes your organizations who have really good quality initiatives in creating a positive work environment. And they come in, they look at the initiatives that you have going, and they determine whether or not you are a facility that is considered a, quote, pathway facility. So this is a start to achieving magnet status. For those who may not be able to achieve magnet status, they can at least become a pathway to excellence facility. Last couple of things here. Be careful in organizations who have lots and lots of committees. Too many committees in an organization is a sign that there's a poorly designed organizational structure. It's okay to have committees, and that's fine, but you don't want to have too many committees because then you lose a little bit of your structure and a little bit of your control. You can have temporary committees. We talked about that earlier. Once they've established and completed their project, then dissolve the committee. There's no need to have it anymore. If you are on a committee and you notice the committees, make sure that they're productive. There should be an appropriate number of members. You don't need tons of members on a committee. Smaller committees usually work a little bit better. Make sure that there's always a well laid out agenda, clearly outlined tasks, goals, and objectives, and that the leader is effective on this committee. If you happen to get on a committee where this does not apply, then you probably want to step down and ask to be able to come off of that said committee. For an organization to be effective, the structure has to be clearly defined. I like the flatter organizations. I'm a nerd. I think before you take a job, you should seek out and look at the organizational hierarchy. Know who you're going to be answering to. Know where you fit in the organizational structure. Know who you're going to have to communicate with. Know where your decisions are made. Get an idea of the organizational culture by taking a tour, talking to some of the staff members. Do they feel like they belong to this community, or do they hate it? Those are the things you want to look at, because you don't want to be involved in a part of an organization that is ineffective. You want to be a part of a unit and a whole organization that works effectively and that is warm and welcome, and an organization that you can be a true part of and make a difference in.